is that I will lose the ability to see the chat. So unfortunately, if you have a question, you would actually have to unmute and interrupt me, which I'm okay with that, but make it an important one that everybody cares about. So we want to talk today about content strategy and its implications for technical communicators and what that means for us, around the world, whether in India or in North America or anywhere else. So let me give you a little bit of background about where I'm coming from here. My name again is Sarah. There's a lovely picture of me, and I always look like that with makeup and pearls and a jacket, and I'm totally not wearing a t-shirt and jeans today, or every other day. I run a company called Scriptorium Publishing, which is based in North Carolina in the eastern part of the United States. We're about halfway between Atlanta and Washington, D.C. From there, we work with customers mostly in the U.S., but really all over the world, and a lot of companies that are multinationals that have an office in the U.S. and India and China and, absolutely everywhere else, on figuring out how to use content to achieve business goals. What do we need to do with content, and how do we publish efficiently to make it do what we want to? I'm also the co-author of something called Content Strategy 101, which is available at contentstrategy101.com. The book itself, you can buy the book, but if you don't want to, the complete content of the book is on the website as HTML, so you can read through the whole thing there. And if you would take a look, we have it open for comments. So if you want, you can leave your comments and say, this is right or this is wrong or I disagree or whatever you want. So let's start with the question of content strategy. There are a lot of ways of defining content strategy, but the way that I like to define it is really a very simple one, which is to say that content strategy is when you support your business goals using information and information products. So you're using documentation, you're using marketing materials, you're using any sort of content. And it doesn't have to be web content or marketing content. It doesn't even have to be content authored by you or by your organization.
Sarah, this is Mimi again.
I spend a lot of time.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt you. Are you sharing anything? Because we're not able to see.
Oh, that's not good. Did I? I thought I turned it on. I probably skipped the step where you... No, it says my screen. Oh, sorry. My fault. Too many steps. All right, there we go. So let me back up here for a second. There's the intro slide. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, completely my fault. There is a beautiful slide of me with makeup. And here we are in content strategy land. So I spend most of my time on technical content, technical writing, those kinds of things. But what we're experiencing now is that the technical and the marketing roles are very slowly starting to converge and sort of move towards one another. And the other thing that I think is critical to notice when you look at this definition is that there's nothing in here that says anything about language or locale. So we're not saying support your business goals using English language content or Hindi content or anything else. It's just you figure out what the business goals are, and then you figure out from that what languages do I need to support those business goals. The localization, the translation strategy should be driven by your business goals. And I think too often it's driven by things like, we don't want to do that because it's hard. So, you look at the question of, do you have to deliver in more than one language? If you're not, if you're probably English only, then do you expect that you will need to deliver in other languages in the future? It's actually quite rare in large companies to find organizations that will never translate. Even in the US, which tends to be more monolingual, I asked about this in a presentation I did in February, and how many of you translate? Most of them. How many of you plan to translate? Most of the rest. And how many are sure that you will never, ever, ever translate? And one woman raised her hand. And so I asked her what she did. I said, do you work for the government? And she said, yes, I do. And it turned out that she worked for the Forestry Service, the U.S. Forestry Service, which manages, land and forests. And specifically, she was responsible for providing content related to fire. How to manage fire in the forest. What are the policies and the procedures and the protocols when there is a wildfire? What do you do? That's a very small audience, maybe a couple hundred people across the entire United States. So I gave her that one and we moved on. But that's the type of specialized information or specialized niche where you might see that, no, we do not have a need for translation. So I have this definition of content strategy, which is pretty straightforward. But one of the problems we have is that it's still evolving. We're still seeing people try to define it. We have at least 10 different definitions out there. We're arguing about what the boundaries are of content strategy. Where does content strategy stop and information architecture begin? Where does content strategy stop and user experience, UX, begin? Those kinds of things. So what I want to do to start with is give you a framework for dealing with that question of sort of what are the boundaries and how can we look at this. And to do so, I wanted to start with Maslow's hierarchy, which you're probably familiar with. This is a very famous psychologist who constructed this pyramid. And the gist of it is that you address your needs in order. So if you look at the bottom of the pyramid, if you don't have food and water and shelter and warmth, you are not too worried about those ones at the top, inner talent, creativity, and fulfillment. So you have to address the basic needs first before you can move up to security, stability, freedom from fear, friends, family, spouse, lover, etc. So Maslow's hierarchy says that if you don't have food or water or shelter or warmth, then those needs have to be addressed before you move up to the next level of the pyramid. Now, there's another version of this for high tech, which some of you may have seen, which looks like this. This is also known as the conference hierarchy of needs. And based on the, well, not based on this, but based on the other less silly one, I decided to take a look at trying to build out a hierarchy for content. What are the content needs? And what I came up with is this. Like with Maslow, you start at the bottom and you work your way up to the top. So the very bottom state of content, the very most basic thing is that the content actually exists and the person who needs it has access to it. Now, content exists for user is different from content exists. If I need some information, but it's behind a firewall somewhere and I don't have access, then it doesn't exist for me. So making this content available to people who need it is the first step that you have to take in your content needs hierarchy. You can make it available in different ways. You can put it on a website, you can push it via email, you can put it on a private site, you can give people logins, you can send out printed catalogs, you can do whatever you want, but it has to be available. That's step one. And until it's available, really none of the rest of this matters, right? Because if the content is not available to me, then it doesn't matter how wonderful it is. Step two is that the content needs to be accurate. So available is good, but accurate is important. Available but inaccurate is bad. We could discuss whether this includes things like correct grammar and nice formatting and those kinds of things that make it better. You know, is incorrect grammar part of accuracy? I think it is, but of course it's less important than just the basic, is it technically accurate? Is it understandable? So it has to be accurate. It needs to be appropriate. Now, here what we have to do is we have to think about our user and put together what the user actually needs with the options that we have for delivering the content. Technically, if you create a really ugly PDF and stick it on an FTP site somewhere, then that content is technically available, but it might not be appropriate. Appropriate is when you deliver it in a way that's great for your user. That might mean a mobile-friendly HTML website. Maybe it's an EPUB, but you can deliver available and accurate content that is not appropriate and not delivered well. The other thing that goes into this is, are you delivering in the right language for your user? Are you delivering in the right format? If I, as a user, want to look at content on a mobile phone, and you're not delivering content that works on my mobile phone, that's usable on my mobile, then I'm not going to be very happy with you. If I, as a user, am a beginner and the only content available is very, very complex, that's a problem. So appropriate has a lot of different facets, a lot of different dimensions to make sure that the content actually works for the people that need it. The next level up is where you can add things like user engagement, social layers, all the terrible buzzwords. But what I look for here are things like, can your readers comment on your content? Can they vote it up and down? A wiki that readers could edit directly would be very connected. And what you basically want to do is think about how you can support users in engaging and interacting with your content, or perhaps even creating their own content. How does that work? And then finally, when we get to the top of the pyramid, we have intelligent content. This is information that's not static, but can be manipulated in different ways. Maybe you can filter it, maybe it's personalized, maybe I can filter out all the expert level content because that's too hard for me. I just want to see the beginner level content, those kinds of things. So we build out this pyramid and we put a couple more details in and we kind of look at it, and you can see how it scales up the pyramid from, are you creating anything, all the way up to, it's really good and you can do cool things and manipulate it and do some interesting things with it. Now, as you go through this pyramid and you think about it, you don't have to do all of these things. It is not mandatory to create connected or intelligent content. I would argue that it's pretty mandatory to create available, accurate, and appropriate content, but of course a lot of companies don't do that either. And what I would like to see is a scenario where these things are done consciously on purpose, not by accident without a strategy. And here what I'd like to do is think a little bit about the concept of minimum viable product. Minimum viable product, as you probably know, is when a company creates an initial version of a product that has enough features to deploy, to deliver, and nothing more. Now, Google is actually a really good example of this. If you look at the Google website, for example, in India, you get something like this. There's a search box, there's a search button, and there's an I'm feeling lucky. Well, or there was. This is what it used to look like. What it actually looks like now is something more like this. So you have those basic components, but then you've got all this other stuff all around there in various things. So I would say that Google, although it's still pretty minimal, is not exactly a minimum viable product anymore. And of course, this is the India version. The US version looks a little different. So that's minimum viable content. Now, that's minimum viable product. What I want to talk about is minimum viable content, which is our equivalent to minimum viable product. So we have three components here: minimum, viable, and content. Minimum is interesting because for minimum viable product, the minimum is considered the starting point. We're going to do these 4 features. That'll get it out the door. Later, we're going to add 8 more. But I think for minimum viable content, what you're looking at is the correct amount of content. Not too much, not too little. And the sad thing about this is that I don't think that most organizations do this very well. They either don't deliver the right information, they deliver too little, or they deliver far, far, far too much information, way more than the customer wants. The customer has to sort through the information and find what they're looking for, and they're going to have some problems with that. So there's a balancing act between too much and not enough. Viable, at its simplest level, means if you have regulatory requirements in your business, you have to meet those requirements. If you're doing pharmaceuticals that are regulated, if you're doing medical devices, if you have certain government requirements for whatever your product is, you meet those. And the second piece of viable is that the content that you're creating actually meets your business goals. It helps support the business goals in the correct formats and the correct languages. It's created by the right people and all the rest of it. So minimum viable content looks something like this. It's accurate, concise, and complete, and it's delivered in the right way on time. That sounds pretty straightforward, but I think for any of us that have ever tried to work in any sort of content organization, ever, you know that this is actually really hard. This is a big, big ask. Another way of looking at this then is to basically graph it. So we look at minimum viable content. You have not enough, too much, and then you have content that's so bad or so inappropriate that it actually makes it harder to meet your business goals. And somewhere up here, you have what I call the zone of viable content. It's okay to deliver a little too much. It's not great, but it's okay. It's okay to not perfectly align with the business goals, but your goals should be to be all the way at the top of the y-axis, all the way up at the top where it says support business goal with the exact right amount of information. That's where you want to be. But as long as you're somewhere within that sort of polka dotted box, you're probably okay. So minimum viable content means all of these things. Figure out your regulatory, figure out your business goals. That can be a big challenge, especially in large companies. What formats do you need? How are you going to create it? And how quickly do you have to update it? And if you go back to the pyramid that I built earlier, then we know that minimum viable content is when you meet those first 3 levels. The top 2 are perhaps, I don't know about unnecessary, but they can be very useful and very good. But if you don't meet those bottom 3, you do not have minimum viable content. The reason that we need this is because of this statistic. This is specifically for the U.S. I was not able to find these stats for anywhere else. I did look, and for once I actually have. What that means is that we can no longer deliver a product with bad documentation because people are looking at the documentation before they buy. It has to be available, it has to be searchable, it has to be accurate, up to date, and everything else. Because if you don't do this, your customers, your potential customers, are going to find third-party information about your product that says, ew, it's bad, or they might just give up and buy the competitor's product. So minimum viable content isn't something that you do to be nice to your customers. It's something that you do because otherwise you won't be able to sell your product to new customers. And sales, of course, gets the attention of executive management. Now, I always ask about user advocates. A lot of people in technical writing like to say, oh, I'm a user advocate. I advocate for the user. I take care of the user. And my question in response to this is always, are you paid by the users? And the answer is hardly ever yes. There is a balancing act, and there is some user advocacy that goes on, but at the end of the day, most of us are paid not by the user, but by the company that creates the product. And that means that you can't be a pure user advocate. So who is my customer? Who am I actually working with or selling to or serving? And the answer is, in part, the end user, but also all these other things, the company itself, the organization, and within that, the marketing team, the product manager, tech support, department manager, and all the rest of it. So those are probably, in some cases, the customer might be the departmental manager, and very little beyond that because perhaps the writer doesn't have access to these other people. We have all these different possibilities, all these different ways to deliver content, and we can do nearly anything. A lot of these options have only been around for a few years. You may recall the iPad didn't come out until something like 2008. The Kindle was maybe a year or two before that, like 2006 or thereabouts. I mean, this stuff has not been around for very long. And I think it's time for us to kind of rethink the book container and rethink what it means to deliver content and what it means to deliver a book. Erin McCain is a lexicographer. She works on dictionaries and is now CEO of a company called WordNick, which is all about cool words. And she likes to tell people that a dictionary is not, in fact, a book. It looks like a book. It has the physical form factor of a book, but it's not sequential or narrative. What she argues, in fact, is that a book, or a dictionary, is actually a database. And once you start thinking of a dictionary and similar reference content as a database, then you can start thinking about some interesting things you might do with them. You might, for example, on a Kindle device, deliver the dictionary, like so, where people can look up a particular word and origins, and that's useful. But what's actually much, much more useful is this version, where when you're reading, if you put your cursor on a word that you don't understand, it will give you the definition of that word at the bottom of the page, embedded, without you really asking for it. All you have to do is put your cursor there, and it will magically show up at the bottom of the page. I would argue that this is actually a much more powerful way of using a dictionary. And we've seen some uses of this that were not expected. One is that, I mean, of course, for me, if I'm reading a book and I run across some word I don't know, I can just look it up and move on. It's a very short lookup period. I don't have to get out a dictionary, flip to the right page, find the word, etc. But it turns out that kids use this, and English learners. So somebody who is reading English and is maybe not completely proficient in English can use this embedded dictionary to provide some support very quickly. Children who are reading a book that's maybe just a tad bit above their reading level can use this and find the words, and it will support them in reading a book that's maybe more challenging than they would have otherwise been able to read. So a book is not always the best container, and we have to think about what's the best way of delivering reference material. Can we do this in better ways, as they've done with the Kindle and the dictionary? I'm personally not a huge fan of EPUB. It feels to me like a book container that's just been put on a tablet. But interactive tutorial sites are nice. And I have a couple of other examples here I wanted to show you of some new technologies. This is one. This is an Audi. Audi has made an app, an augmented reality app. And if you look at the phone that's being shown in the foreground, when you take your app and you sit down in your lovely Audi, you can then look through the phone or look at the phone, and it will give you this overlay with all these little red things that tell you what those things are on the car. So if I were then to click on one of those things that has a red overlay, I can then get additional information that says, this is, I have no idea what those things are. These are the lights, or this changes the radio channel, or whatever. The underlying text was created by the technical documentation group, and then it was integrated into this overlay. So the only new technology that's here is the overlay. The content is there. We've already written the content. We know how to do that. So augmented reality, I think, is one. Another example I have is this one. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to sync Google Calendar with iOS on an iPhone, but I can tell you that it is the worst experience in the history of ever. It turns out that Google recognizes this, and what they did was they wrote a help page, which you can read. But of course, as you're reading the help page, you can't do, if you're on your phone, you can't simultaneously do the things you need to do. You have to keep switching back and forth. And so somebody clever at Google said, oh, well, let's record the instructions. So what you can do is you can play the instructions, which will say, first go to the Settings app. And you go to Settings, and it gives you this huge pause while you go to Settings. And then it goes on and says, now find wherever this is, network, I don't even know. So you go in there, and it will walk you through it step by step by step using audio so that you don't have to use your screen real estate for the help. Now, there's some obvious accessibility issues with this, but as a solution for this multi-step procedure that I found to be pretty challenging, this is a really, really cool solution. So there are some new things coming, and I think that as TechCom, it's our responsibility to figure out how best to use these things in the context of our overall strategy. What's the best way to deliver the content? What's the best way for us to do it? So then we start asking questions like, well, how am I going to, what's this mean for me? And how am I going to do in this environment? How am I going to succeed in this environment? And if it's all going to change, what are the implications of that? So here are some of the skills that I think that we will be looking for going forward in technical communication that would help a writer succeed in a TechCom role in the modern, in the next 10 years or so. Product knowledge is one, especially if you work in an organization that has complex products that are hard to understand. I think product knowledge is always a plus. Now, for consumer electronics, where the product knowledge is pretty basic, this isn't as important, but I think that this is something that companies do look for. Do you understand network management? Do you understand finance? Do you understand whatever it is that needs to be understood? The second broad category is research and analysis. Within that, there are things like web analytics, knowing how to assess content that's been posted on the web and understand the analytics that you get around that content, knowing how to do customer assessments, and looking in user-generated content for new information that maybe should be documented. Those kinds of things I think will be a big deal. And finally, the TechCom-MarCom convergence. This is where we're looking at the question of, is this product, is this information product a technical communication piece or is it a marketing piece? Maybe it's both at the same time. And for those people who can write both kinds of content, I think there will be a lot of possibilities there. So then we start thinking about TechCom career paths. I learned some interesting things about mountain goats. It turns out that they apparently have suction cups on the bottom of their feet, sort of like an octopus, and that's why they don't fall off the cliff. That was one thing I learned. And the other thing I learned was that it is extremely difficult, apparently, to take good pictures of mountain goats because they run away. This one I don't think is particularly all that, but cute guy. So career paths. Writer is certainly one. I've ordered these from most specific, I think, to least specific, or maybe from most tactical to most strategic. I don't think there's any particular good or bad or anything like that. It's more a question of how specific do you want to be? Do you want to learn everything about a particular product and document it? Or do you want to stay at a high level and have a broad view of everything? Those are not good or bad, they're just different. So your career paths, writer is certainly one. Tools specialist is one. All this stuff that's coming and all this intelligent content and filtering and magic, that means HTML and XML and XSL and all these different tools, different implementations, that kind of thing. There's, of course, TechCom management. There's site designer, a website designer, and those kinds of things. There's user experience, which is fairly broad. And then there's information architect and content strategist. So those are kind of the things that I look at when I start thinking about what's the best career path for a particular person. Where do their skills fall? Are you really good at tools? Is that your favorite thing to do? Or are you really good at writing clear procedures? Are you interested in the overall organization of all the content, or are you more interested in leading people and working with them and making sure that they have what they need to get their jobs done? So, you know, especially if you're early in your career, you might sit down and think a little bit about where your skills and your interests lie and what area you want to focus on. What would be the thing that you really want to focus on? Now, I want to talk a little bit about information in the wild, information that we do not control. This is an official Honda car site, and I went looking for a particular kind of repair and found this. It turns out you can subscribe to it, and for $10 a day or possibly $20 a day for the higher end version, you can get access to this information. Now, I'm not too sure why you would want one or the other. It looks as though these are mostly for mechanics, for professional repair people, and I thought, well, maybe I don't want to pay for that. So what if I need to repair a Honda Civic? So I went to our friend Google and typed in Honda Civic Repair Manual PDF, and in really not very much time at all, was able to find various things. Now, some of these look a little sketchy, but pretty clearly you can get your hands on the Civic Repair Manual. I then navigated over to one of these sites and found the various manuals, right? So information is out there, and trying to lock it down behind firewalls and things like that, it might work if your audience is professionals who are willing to pay for updates. But if you're dealing with an audience of people who really just need one little bit of information and you don't provide it to them, you're going to have some issues. Now, in addition to what I was just showing you, which was somebody who linked or repurposed or whatever the repair manuals, you're also getting third-party content. Like this: how do I remove a backhoe from a Mahindra tractor? Now, Mahindra, for you may know this, Mahindra is based in by something called Safeway Mahindra, which is a dealer, and they are based in Burgaw, North Carolina. Now, Burgaw is about 2 hours from where I am by car here in North Carolina, about 100 miles. It is a tiny little town. There is nothing there except apparently a largish Mahindra dealer who makes YouTube videos and posts them and gets thousands and thousands of viewers. So we have this just unbelievable distribution of information and distribution of knowledge and ability for people to get that information from third-party sources, not the official, not the official place. And I think that's something that's, that's pretty critical that we need to think about and understand from our point of view as professional content creators. What does that mean when some guy literally halfway around the world is making videos for my organization or for my products, certainly without my permission? What do we do with that? I don't have a good answer. I just look at it and think, well, now what? And I think now what is perhaps the question that we're left with. So I am going to switch out of presenter mode and let you guys ask some questions and see what we have. We've got a little bit of time. Actually, we've got a decent amount of time. And so let me switch over and turn off the screen sharing, and I will see what we've got in the way of questions. All right, so what do you need to know? I know it does take a few seconds to type everything in there and get it all up and running. Okay. User advocates. All right, well, let's start with that one. So, can technical writers think like user advocates to document better? I think that you actually have to strike a balance between understanding the needs of the business and the needs of the end user. Because if you just act as a user advocate, then you might not take into account the business needs and vice versa, right? So there's a balance there. And I think that the balance has to do with making sure that if the users need particular kinds of things, why is that? I think that's kind of the question that you have to ask. So how do you think like a user advocate? In some cases, you just put yourself in their shoes. If you're looking at a particular product and you're actually the target end user for whatever reason, then you can kind of put yourself in their shoes and say, well, if I were using this or if I were buying this product, what would I want? But in other cases, if the product is not really something that's directly applicable to what you do or to your life, then I would look to see whether you can find people, talk to the end users, understand where they're coming from, those kinds of things. Try to develop that level of understanding of what they are trying to do. All right, so that's user advocates. Is site designer part of TechCom? I'm talking about a website designer, so somebody who would determine the look and feel of a particular website. Is it part of TechCom or not? That depends. That's always the answer. It depends. But I think generally, if TechCom is posting information to a public or a private website, to any sort of website, somebody has to do the site design. Is that strictly speaking part of TechCom? Maybe it's the responsibility of the marketing organization, but that's more of an organizational question, right? If I'm delivering a website or if I'm delivering content on a website, that site has to be designed. As to whether that design belongs to TechCom, belongs inside TechCom, or belongs outside TechCom, either way, I would argue that it's part of your delivery, so it has to be done by somebody. Strictly. Usually it lives in Marcom, which I think is your question, but usually it lives over in marketing. But I have a deliverable, so I think there's stuff I need there. So I would say that it's at least related to TechCom if it's not part of TechCom. Information architect and user experience designer. They are related. And in fact, I saw a presentation yesterday by someone named Nick Fink, I do believe, who his basic argument is that user experience is a broad swath of things that includes information architecture, content strategy, and quite a long list of other things. And so Nick's argument is basically that you might specialize in information architecture, you might specialize in content strategy, but those things are all part of the overall UX thing. So if you take a look at that presentation that I posted the link for you, you'll see what he talks about, and he's actually got it broken down very, very nicely into these different niches and how it all breaks down. Let me pull it up here and talk through this just for a second, and then if you're interested, you can go look at it later. So he has 6 core disciplines of user experience: user research, interaction design, content strategy, visual design, information architecture, and then usability and analytics. And basically, different people focus on different parts of this. If you do a little bit of everything, then you're probably a UX person. You might focus on content strategy, etc. So do go take a look at Nick's presentation. He explained this better than anybody else that I've seen. And in fact, I read through this presentation. I thought, oh, well, that actually makes some amount of sense. So, because I think that we're all struggling with those definitions. But there you are. And tell him I said hi if you send him email. Anything else? I have an unfair advantage in that I get to talk and you have to type. How do we embark on the process of content strategizing? Well, I think it all starts with the business goals. What are the goals of the business, and does the content that you deliver now meet, support, help the goals of the business? If it does not, or if it does not do so well, then you have some work to do. So, for example, very, very common kinds of scenarios are things like we deliver these 500-page PDFs and everybody hates them, but that's all we know how to do. And we've decided we really need to deliver our content on a website in HTML in small chunks, because that way it's easier for people to consume. So the business problem is essentially that people are having problems with the 500-page PDFs, then they call tech support, and that costs a lot of money. Their product satisfaction is low, or they even return the products because they can't find the information that they need. They can't find it, they're unhappy, bad things happen to the organization. So how do we make the information more findable and deliver it in a way that makes the customers happier and therefore makes the organization do better overall? So you start with something like that, customers are not happy because, or a different example, we know our process for creating content is very inefficient. But until now, we've only delivered in English, and now all of a sudden we have to deliver in 8 or 10 or 20 or 50 languages, and that inefficiency is going to make the language processing just unbelievably expensive. Is there a better way to do this? Can we save money on the localization side somehow? So those are the kinds of questions you start with. It's not, hey, I want XML. It's, where is our process broken and how can we make it better? Where can we show cost efficiency or cost avoidance? Where can we contribute to revenue? Where can we improve the organization's results? A different example is, a lot of these are around localization translation. If the organization has a lengthy delay in translation, and I've seen delays of 6 months or even a year. It takes a year from we wrote the English stuff to the Thai or Chinese stuff is available. Well, you can't sell into the Thai or Chinese market until you have the localized content. And so then you ask the question, well, how big is the market in China? How many millions of dollars are we having to wait to get for a year? And it becomes quite easy to justify better process because it will speed up localization, because that will result in revenue sooner to the organization. But that's where you have to start. You start with the question of, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? What is the business problem that you're trying to solve? Based on that, you can figure out how to justify whatever change it is that you're proposing that would lead to better results in that business area. So you have to take a holistic view, a big picture view of what you're dealing with. Outside of I want to deliver some other kind of content, or whatever. You really want to focus on the business side of things first, and then on how you can combine those things. How do you take the business issues and put them together with your content? How can you make your content support the business? That's really the question. So I can take some more questions if you have them. If you would rather email me directly, feel free to do that. I didn't give you my contact information slide, but my email is there. And of course, our website is there. And everything else is all over the place. My career so far, sorry, my career is humorous. Okay. I went to, I attended Duke University and majored in, well, something complicated, but let's call it international affairs and also German. So I was well qualified for a career in the U.S. Foreign Service, diplomacy, that type of thing, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. And when I graduated, I did have some computer skills, and this was back in the days when, in the early 90s, when computer skills were an important thing to have, and not a lot of people had them, unlike today. So I ended up getting a job in software, or actually in marketing, really. Did some stuff in marketing, and then I eventually kind of landed in TechCom, noodled around there for a while, and then worked for a couple of software companies. One of them did one of these startup, really small, really big, and oops, back to really small. At that point, I decided that working for other people was stupid for me, and I started my own business. So that was 17 years ago. The business has evolved in the sense that what we're doing now is different from what we were doing almost 20 years ago. That's a horrifying thought. But we've always been focused on content and publishing technology and what's happening around those things. So that's my focus. And that's kind of where we've stayed. And now we have, I have I have 7 employees here, and we do these really interesting content strategy projects. We work with lots of very large organizations and as well, but just really big companies that are trying to solve really big problems. And it's just fascinating, and I totally love it. Content strategy and enterprise content management, right. So, I mean, yes, they are related in that content strategy is just a very broad apply content to solve business problems. Enterprise content management is a way of solving a particular set of problems, right? So enterprise content management is a category of tools, or maybe an approach. Now, there's different definitions of ECM, so you get in trouble with that. But I would say generally you go off and you figure out your strategy, and once you figure out your strategy, maybe an enterprise content management tool is something that can help you actually execute your strategy. So that's what I would look for, is the strategy first, and then figure out the rest of it and how you're going to resolve that. It is a non-trivial kind of problem. Now, ECM in many cases is applied to things like managing business documents, invoices, email even, as opposed to content strategy, which is nearly always focused on managing customer-facing content, whether it's technical content or marketing content. But this is a matter of degree, and a matter of we understand that as insiders, but I don't know that anybody else on the outside understands those kinds of things. The people on the outside just see content people. And there we are. So, how do you make the transition from being a writer to being a content strategist? Well, Um, that seems to be the question that everybody's asking. As a writer, you're very focused, and you need to be very focused on small details. Is this procedure written correctly? Is there a step missing? Did I do this right? Did I format it correctly? Did I apply the right tags? Did I follow the template? Do I know what I need to know about this product so that I can document it? As the content strategist, you're asking questions like, what should our localization strategy be? And are we delivering this content in the best possible way to support what we're trying to do as a business? Do we need to look at a new set of tools and technologies to support what we do? So I think that from a transition point of view, I think you look for opportunities where you can make recommendations that would improve the it would improve the authoring and the publishing and the delivery experience, whether it means better tools or better whatever, but to make it more efficient. You look for opportunities to help your organization deliver better, and much more so at a high level than at a low level. But to give you an idea, I mean, for example, if your organization does not have a style guide, you should really have one that just says basic things like use click instead of select, or use tap instead of whatever, word choice, grammar, standardization on how to do trademarks. Those kinds of things can save a lot of time if they're documented and everybody just follows them instead of arguing about them all the time. And that too is a part of content strategy. So think of content strategy as establishing the framework that allows the writers to do what they need to do in an efficient way. And I think that's one way where you can get some visibility as a writer into what are the things that need to happen from a content strategy point of view, and what are some of the things that you can then, that you can do with that to get started, because probably you're not going to get, a massive, here, guess what, you're going to be a content strategist next week. That's a different kind of thing. I hope that helps, but I don't know that I have a particularly good answer to this question. Yes, I do think it is a journey. Okay, other questions from this group? Lots of good questions. Are there tools that help in content strategy? Oh dear. And it's a totally valid question, and it's a question that a lot of people are asking. But the sad thing is that our primary tool, and this is just so embarrassing, I really don't even want to tell you this, but our primary tool these days is Excel. Excel spreadsheets. Horrifying, terrible Excel spreadsheets. There are a few tools out there. There's one for content auditing and some other things. But, at the end of the day, most of what I do is write reports. I go into organizations and I look at their process and their workflows and their situation and their scenario, and then I turn around and I tell them it needs to be like this, and I make recommendations. So a big part of that is that you end up with a spreadsheet of options, different content management systems that they might need to implement. You end up with a spreadsheet listing all the languages they need and how they haven't been built properly. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So we don't have any good tools. This is all sort of business analysis stuff. Content auditing is when you go and you look at existing content. This is usually done for a website. So you go and you look at an existing piece of content, like a website, and you look through it and you figure out what's there, what should be there, what shouldn't be there that is there, and what's missing. So your content audit basically maps from the current state of the website to, this is what we identified, this is what's there. We have 5,000 white papers, but only 4 of them got more than 100 hits last year. So, maybe we should think about getting rid of 3,996 of them. Yeah, Excel is, yes, and Ravi Kumar says same thing, used Excel for a content audit. It's pathetic, but that's where we are. Let me see if I can dig up the content auditing tool. There is such a thing. Oh, there it is. That was easy. So there is something called Content Insight, and that is, in fact, a content inventory support kind of tool. So that's something. But the general answer is Excel, and actually, embarrassingly, I do a lot, and I mean a lot, of presentations. So I'm afraid that my primary tools are along the lines of Keynote, which is the Mac PowerPoint equivalent, Keynote, Excel, and when I can't get away from it, Microsoft Word. Because I'm just writing basic business documents to help support people. Now, I'm making recommendations for high-end content tools, content management systems, and all the rest of it. But what I'm doing as a strategist is just making recommendations. So those are not really going in any sort of structured deliverable usually. What type of industries and all right, I will deal with these two, and then I think we'll maybe wrap it up. But those are both good questions. What type of industries and organizations are asking for content strategy? All of them. I don't see any particular pattern. I would say that a lot of software companies, because they have so much volume and are so tools friendly, did this pretty early on. We deal with a lot of industrial companies. Not Mahindra is not specifically a customer of ours, but that category of industry, people that make heavy machinery, they are doing this. Not-for-profit organizations that have a lot of content, especially if they sell it. Trade publishers, professional publishers, software, high-tech, telecommunications, all of them. Anybody that has a lot of high-value content that they care about. And also, are you really? Oh, well, that is awesome. Hi. So I did not know that. So yay me for picking an example that worked. So everybody, I mean, everybody is out there doing this. I think that rather than asking about industry patterns, the type of, well, you asked which type of industries. The type of company that is doing this is a company that has a large amount of content that is customer facing and that they are having trouble managing. Most of the time they have translation localization, not always, but most of the time. And if they do, that's an easy place to justify change because localization is so expensive that investments in efficiency are very, very helpful. So is there a process? Oh, well, yes, there is a process. Most of the processes, if you just look at standard management consulting, that's kind of what you're dealing with. Identify the problem, needs analysis, gap analysis, return on investment calculations, all that stuff. Take a look at the Content Strategy 101 site. There is an outline there of kind of how the process works. One thing I haven't talked about here is change management, which we find is by far the biggest challenge in introducing new things. So that's something to focus on. But the process overall, this is not, really a new thing in the sense that it's not really different from any other kind of business reorganization change thing. So you just use all the tools that we already have available to us outside of content strategy in general business operations kinds of things, and also management consulting. That's another place you can kind of look. So, okay. Any final questions? It's getting late for you. Oh, the book. Yes. The book site is contentstrategy101.com. So if you want to buy it, that's fine with me, but the content is all there on the website, so you can read it there. So, all right, Rini, did you
Okay, so I think then we are done, Sarah. Thank you. Nothing. I think we can just wrap up for today. And I would like to thank you on behalf of STC India for accepting, to give a session. It was a very interesting and useful session. And the answers to all of our questions were interesting too. And thank you so much for your time. And I also would like to thank all the... Sure. So thanks everyone for joining, and
I'm thinking for asking a question.
For people who are in India, have a good evening, Sarah, you have a good day.
To see you soon. Bye now.
Sure. Thank you. Bye-bye.